and the entire government is really just helmed by grannycrats from both parties, and ostensibly always has been. In 1883, 80-year-old Justice of the Peace Samuel K. Taylor was declared too old to be a justice. Another from 1906, prospective presidential candidate, 72-year-old Speaker of the House Joseph Gurney Cannon, was too old to run. And then there are the old grannies who weren't just old, but who experienced demonstrable mental decline. In 1919, President Woodrow Wilson suffered a debilitating stroke at the age of 62, and the First Lady Edith all but assumed the title of president, though the public was not made aware of this. Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas refused to immediately retire from his post after suffering a stroke in 1974, which left him partially paralyzed and cognitively impaired, so much so that members of the court made the decision to delay cases where his vote would have a major impact until he finally retired the following year. Ronald Reagan, of course, who many believe to have been suffering from dementia during his second term, struggled through his first debate with 56-year-old Walter Mondale, and a headline from the Wall Street Journal after the debate asked, "New question in race, is oldest US president now showing his age?" In their second debate, 2 weeks later, Reagan addressed this by saying,
"I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience."
Reagan was 77 when his second term ended, and he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease 5 years later after leaving office. When you might not know, during his re-election campaign, the fact that President Eisenhower would be 70 by the end of his second term became an election issue. President defended, "Bolton denies Eisenhower is too old to run again." Okay, so trying to remedy some of this. In the '92 election, ballot initiatives imposing term limits on Congress were on ballots in 14 states. For the Senate, the term limit was set at 12 years, and for the House, the term limit was set between 6 and 12 years. All 14 voted in favor of setting term limits, only to be rebuffed by the Supreme Court in 1995. So no progress there, and thus grannycrats carried on through a group of older politicians, mostly Southern Democrats, who refused to step down despite appearing unfit to carry out the duties of office and were often seen as just hampering social progress. Strom Thurmond clung to his Senate seat until 2003 at the age of 100, with the help of staffers who managed his every move. Robert Byrd served in the Senate despite similar reliance on staffers until he died in office in 2010 at the age of 92, and another quintessential grannycrat, Representative John Dingell, served in the House for 59 years before retiring in 2015. Even more recently, Ruth Bader Ginsburg died in her post at 87, leaving her vacancy to be filled by Amy Coney Barrett, as did Dianne Feinstein, whose obvious lack of fitness for office raised serious concerns before she similarly died in office at 90. But that's all in the past. We have our own partially alive grannycrats to contend with. Nancy Pelosi recently broke her hip after falling in Luxembourg while there in part to commemorate the Battle of the Bulge in World War II, a battle she was alive for. She's 84. And on the Republican side, Mitch McConnell, or Glitch McConnell as he's come to be known around my apartment, now almost routinely freezes up while speaking and has fallen on several occasions, leading to at least one concussion, a fractured shoulder and rib, a sprained wrist, and we can assume a bruised ego. He is 81, and Bernie Sanders, still the leading voice of the left, who suffered a heart attack during his last run for president, he's 83. So clearly, though, this has always been a problem in American politics, right? I mean, it certainly feels, especially after this near exhaustive rundown, like we've always lived under the frail thumb of a gerontocracy. However, these rather notable examples were the exceptions, not the rule. So if it feels to you like our representatives are just plain older now, you would be right. They are.
And a string of
In our 119th Congress, in the House, 44% are 60 or older, and then 20% are 70 or older. And then in the Senate, 67% of senators are 60 or older, and 34% are 70 or older. And in case you're thinking, well, of course, we're all simply living longer, as of 2025, only 17% of the population is 65 or older. Meanwhile, during the 1840s, the heyday of the grannycrats, less than 1% of representatives were over the age of 70. Your average member of the House would have been in their early 40s, while your average senator would have been in their late 40s or early 50s. Ken Klippenstein, independent journalist publishing his newsletter via Substack, has been closely covering the gerontocracy beat, led by a cabal of entrenched, aging politicians he's named the Mothball Mafia. So how did we wind up living in the gerontocracy? When did 81 become the new 67?
Yeah, there are different factors. There's the more innocuous factor, which is just that people are living longer. Healthcare is getting better. It's becoming easier to keep people from dying as they grow into old age. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't mean that you can keep their brains from dying, their brains from declining. And so you have a lot of people that are living into ages that they hadn't lived before. The relative decrease in in American lifespan notwithstanding, it's highly class stratified. And so these individuals have, better healthcare than most Americans have. They have more money. And so you mix that with the advances in health technology, and you have a recipe for a much older age demographic in Congress.
Surely it's a good thing that, at least in theory, modern medicine allows us to keep our loved ones around for longer. However, it's also probably not great that modern medicine can obscure how much the aging process has impaired someone's cognitive function, especially when someone is charged with making decisions that affect everything from our well-being as working people to issues like national security.
I'm a national security reporter, and so people sometimes ask me, they're like, how did you get into gerontocracy beat? And the answer to that question is I stumbled into it. It wasn't intentional. I was reading a RAND Corporation report. That's the Pentagon-funded think tank that does a lot of defense and national security stuff. And I noticed one day that they had done a report on concerns about intelligence officials or people with access to classified and sensitive intelligence who have dementia. What do you do in that case? And it turns out, despite all the vetting, all the polygraphs and continuous vetting and procedures they have to make sure that people are not in a position, say, for example, you're in the intelligence community or you have access to intelligence, you have a security clearance, and you have a lot of debt. That can get your clearance pulled because then you're in a position where you can get blackmailed or you can need money, and there are a lot of risks. So they have all of these complicated and frankly kind of intrusive mechanisms they use to make sure that the people with the security clearances aren't at risk, except for one thing. They essentially have nothing for how to deal with if somebody's becoming senile or someone is experiencing cognitive decline. They don't have anything on the books to be able to handle that.
Okay, so this should be alarming to everyone. In Congress, the most sensitive, highly classified information is given only to a group of representatives known as the Gang of Eight.
If you only have 8 people that get read into all the secret stuff that the military and the intelligence community is doing, it's really important that those people be up to the job, so that they can know when they need to paraphrase something to press, or if something's a concern, and they can go and either, discuss it with the rest of Congress, or, find some way to make the information known to the public. And I thought to myself, just a couple of years ago, Nancy Pelosi would have been one of the Gang of Eight. Mitch McConnell, who we see glitching out, I think he's had like 3 incidents where he's just freezes in front of cameras and clearly is not doing well. All of these figures are like well into their 80s. And I thought of that RAND report and I thought, gosh, like to say nothing of the Pentagon and all these other agencies, just the elected officials that we see on TV, that we're supposed to see publicly every day, are very clearly not where they were, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Like, what's going on?
And the gerontocracy reigns over some frankly pretty important congressional committees as well. In the Senate, Chuck Grassley, 91, is chair of the Judiciary Committee, and Jerry Moran, 70, is the ranking member of the Committee on Veterans Affairs. In the House, Tom Cole, 75, is chair of the Appropriations Committee. Tim Walberg, 73, is chair of the Education and the Workforce Committee. And it continues on with 74-year-old Jerry Connolly, who informed the public 2 days after winning re-election in 2024 that he has esophageal cancer, which, as Klippenstein has noted, is usually extremely aggressive. He won his position as ranking member of the House Oversight Committee after being challenged by 35-year-old Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. On this, Connolly told CNN,
"I've never had my chance to be a ranking member or chairman of a full committee. This is it."
Now, whether he's able to completely fulfill the duties of this critical committee assignment is really besides the point, as